What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving a recap, breakdown, analysis, reaction, and review of the first episode in the Showtime series, Dexter Resurrection. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching this episode yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. Dexter Resurrection is a crime drama mystery television series developed by Clyde Phillips, taking place just a few weeks after the events of Dexter New Blood, wherein Dexter Morgan, who has miraculously recovered from his near-fatal gunshot wound, chases a missing Harrison to New York City as Captain Angel Batista is hot on their trail from way down in Miami. The show is a sequel series to Dexter New Blood and Dexter, and it features Michael C. Hall reprising his role as Dexter Morgan, alongside Peter Dinklage, David Zayas, Jack Alcott, James Remar, Uma Thurman, Natari Moeen, Kadia Saraf, Dominic Formosa, and Amelia Suarez. And the show premiered on Paramount Plus with Showtime on July 11th of this year. Now, at the time of the making of this video, the show has an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, with its popcorn meter currently sitting at 83%. The series has a Metascore of 63 on Metacritic based on 16 critic reviews, with a user score of 7.9 based on just 47 user ratings. And finally, the series overall has a 9.1 out of 10 on IMDb with almost 10,000 ratings. Now look, guys, though I would consider myself more than a fan of the original Dexter series, I can admit that the end of the series was shit. But when Dexter New Blood was announced, I saw it as a limited series that presented a chance for the writers to right the wrongs of the original series. But again, I was let down by the ending, this time with a little tease for my trouble. Then we got Dexter Original Sin, which initially I thought was a mistake. And at this point, I think it's an even bigger mistake, considering that I've heard that there's going to be a second season of Original Sin. So in my mind, all that does is just present another chance for them to completely destroy the canon from the original series, which I was really disappointed in a lot of the things that were different from the original show in Original Sin. And I think this is kind of the problem with, kind of retconning these shows and kind of bringing up, sequel shows and things like that, because you're changing writing staffs, you're changing, directors and producers and stuff like that. And it's too much room for you to mess things up. I think that when you take a show that's excellent like the OG Dexter series was, and you decide, hey, let's do a remake, the only thing you can do is mess it up. It's kind of like if you got a B on a test, or you got an A on a test, right? But it's a low A, and you go, I want 100, so let me take it again. It's like you're probably not going to get higher than you already scored. What's much more likely is that you're going to mess something up and get a lower score. So that's kind of how I look at with this kind of stuff. But apparently, Dexter didn't die at the end of New Blood. So here, according to the latest trailers for Dexter Resurrection, we're preparing for Dexter to be revived at a clinic and gently confronted by Batista before making a run for it, following Harrison to New York City, where we will wait with bated breath to find out if Harrison decides to take up his father's mantle in the Big Apple, all while Daddy does his damnedest to track him down in a city of 8 million people. And I don't really know how to feel about that, because at this point, it just feels like Dexter's story may never end. But in order to make this show, in my opinion, worth the squeeze, there are a few things that the writers need to address with the absolute gypsiness. First things first, the writers have to properly address Batista's feelings about finding Dexter alive, and by that I mean he has to hunt that ass down after he takes off from the hospital, or get someone to do it on his behalf, because, again, he is currently retired. We also need to figure out if Harrison's a killer for real. I mean, we already know he can hurt someone, but we need to know if he's going to go into the family business. And that has to happen by season's end, because according to a report from Collider, this is a show, meaning that there are multiple seasons planned. So I would lean towards Harrison becoming a killer, so brace yourself for that. Also, Dexter needs to be at full breach, which I'm sure he eventually will be, because that's what makes this show go. And in addition, with what looks to be a rather interesting cast, and speaking of cast, I mean, surprised to see Uma Thurman on television, but, okay. But we do need a continuation of the show's typical format, in that we need a big bad, which, if the trailer is any indication, it looks like it might be Peter Dinklage's character, which means Dexter has to kill him by season's end, and who knows, maybe him and Harrison will tag team that ass. That could be an interesting way to set the show up for long-term success, especially if they've got Batista running them down. And these are just my preseason thoughts, having not watched the episode myself yet. Now, episode 1, titled A Beating Heart, starts 10 weeks after Dexter was taken to the hospital after the events of New Blood, or at the beginning of Original Sin, tomato, tomato. And he's effectively in a coma at the Seneca Nation Clinic, and while in said coma, he is visited by Arthur Mitchell. And during the visit, he asks Arthur if he's dead. And Arthur replies, "No, not yet," before remarking that almost being killed by someone you are fond of has its own particular sting. Now, Dexter explains to Arthur that he told Harrison to shoot him, that he was following the code. And Arthur laughs and replies, "Pretty fucked up way to look at patricide." Now, Dexter then explains that Harrison has lived a pretty fucked up life because of him. Arthur explains that Harrison's situation isn't his fault, but Dexter, that his desire to live the dream is what led Harrison to be sitting in the pool of his mother's blood. And Dexter is then transported back to the bathtub where Rita died and where Harrison sat beside her. Now, Arthur goes on to explain to Dexter that if Harrison hadn't been made to sit in the pool of his mother's blood, that he might not have become a father killer like him. And Dexter exclaims, "He's nothing like you." Trinity then offers Dexter some serial killer to serial killer advice, right? He tells Dexter that where he went wrong was thinking that he could have both his family and his dark passenger. Dexter explains that the bullet to his chest taught him that. Trinity then explains to Dexter that, like his savior, as in Jesus, sometimes you have to go through hell to achieve resurrection. See what they did there? Now, at that point, Dr. Abrams and Janice, who is a clinic nurse, come in to check on Dexter, noting that he's still unresponsive. And next, Dexter gets a visit from good old Miguel Prado, the bestie, right? In a graveyard, not unlike the graveyard where he buried Ellen Wolf, if you remember. And he talks to Dexter about friendship and having another grown man that he could trust. Dexter explains that it was something that the both of them needed at the time, that typically the only time he could be that open with someone is when they were on his table and he was about to kill them. Miguel then explains to Dexter that when he killed other killers, future victims were saved, but that when he tried to be normal, that people who didn't deserve it found themselves equally as dead. And then he shows Dexter the graves of Deb, Maria LaGuerta, Rita, and James Dokes, before explaining further to Dexter that his path is a lonely one. Now, in my opinion, these scenes are not only meant to serve as the season's opening image, but also as a means of exposition, right? This is explaining to us what Dexter has learned from all he's been through at this point, how he sees himself after being shot by his own son, because even though he's talking to Arthur Mitchell, he's talking to Miguel Prado, he's really talking to himself, right? And this is his starting point for this particular news story. It's also the start of the episode's A story, which is centered around Dexter. And I say A story because Dexter, I'm still going to look at him as the main character here. So, Dexter waking up from his coma and then ultimately going to find his son is what the episode's A story is going to consist of, just for GP. Now, from there, we see Harrison waking up by alarm in a hotel room in New York City. We watch him wash up, after he puts in his earbuds, we watch him wash up and get ready to start his day as a bellhop at the Empire Hotel, or Hotel Empire, however you want to say it, right? We see that he has procured some marijuana vape pens, what it looks like, don't quote me on that, I'm not a smoker, before finally getting fully dressed, grabbing his book bag and headed out the door. And these marijuana vape pens become really important, so keep that in mind. Now, after exiting the room, he comes across a young lady named Elsa Rivera, a maid at the hotel, and she gives him a letter that came for him, letting him know that he passed his test for the GED. Remember, Harrison was in high school in Iron Lake. All the shit went down. He went on the run, so you assume he ain't had a chance to finish school. So I guess he decided to take the GED instead. I get it. That makes some sense, right? The pair celebrate briefly, with Harrison thanking Elsa for pushing him to take the test. And Elsa explains to Harrison that he's very pushable, that it's one of the things she likes about him. So, I would, go think that this may end up being the girlfriend, right? Now, Harrison asks Elsa if she still needs him to watch her son later, and she says yes, that she has a lot of tests coming up. So she's studying for something. We don't know what exactly yet. She then tells Harrison that the top floor suites are reserved for an upcoming gala, but that he can take room 237, that she'll make sure it's cleaned last. Harrison thanks her, then explains that he has to go because Stefan is on the prowl. Now from here, we watch Harrison take the elevator down to the bottom floor, and he walks through the kitchen, fraternizing with the kitchen staff as he takes out the trash, or he grabs a burrito and takes out the trash. Really, really nasty, but, whatever. Now, I want you to take special note to how he ties the bags closed, because it'll become important later on in this episode. Now, he ends up talking to a guy named Lance, who appears to be the valet for the hotel, parking someone named Ryan's car. As he passes by, he asks Lance if the car he's parking belongs to Ryan. Lance tells him that it does, that Ryan has a honey on his arm, and that he's looking for him. So Ryan is this upscale hotel guest. Maybe he stays at the hotel quite a lot. He's that dude, I suppose. Now, Harrison then walks into the front entrance of the hotel, and we meet the infamous Stefan, who was on the prowl, right? Who chastises Harrison apparently for not quite being late. He kind of fusses that, Harrison's like, I'm on time. And he's like, yeah, but on time is really late. He's one of those. Now, as that's happening, we meet Ryan, who is indeed walking up with a woman on his arm, asking Harrison if he has his stuff, and that's when Harrison gives him the marijuana vape pens. And Ryan tips him, claiming that he can find anything in the city. He then explains that his watch stopped working and asks Harrison if he can find a place to fix it. Harrison says that he can, and Ryan remarks to Stefan that Harrison is the best. And the watch will also become important later. Now, at that point, two male guests arrive, and Harrison welcomes them to the hotel. They explain that they checked in online and that they're in room 715. Harrison then offers to show them to said room. Now, on the elevator, Harrison asks the men if they're in town for business before telling them that if they need any recommendations for dinner or bars, that he's the guy. Now, as the door opens, he has a vision wherein he's back in the snowy woods of Iron Lake where he shot his dad. In fact, he hears a gunshot and sees a trail of blood before he's interrupted by the gentleman who he eventually does show to their room. Now, he bumps into a woman named Shauna thereafter, looking for the Topics in Emergency Care Conference. As the pair walk the hall, Shauna introduces herself before Harrison asks if it's her first time in New York. She explains that it is, and that she thought she would hate it, being from Iowa and all, but that she actually loves it. She explains that for the first thing that she did when she got to town was go to the Magnolia Bakery. Harrison then tells her that he has a lot of recommendations for spots that actual New Yorkers go to, but Shauna explains that she's going to be busy with conferences before they get on the elevator, and she finally tells Harrison that he's lucky he lives in New York, that it feels like a person can be whoever they want to be there, just as the elevator doors close. And here we basically see the beginning of the episode's setup, right? Essentially, we see Harrison at work. And this is also the start of the episode's B story, which, having seen the episode in its entirety at this point, is Harrison ultimately getting himself into a bit of trouble, if you know what I'm saying, more in a bit. And here we also see that Harrison likely has, a love interest in Elsa. Whether they end up together or just hooking up or being just friends is still yet to be seen. Because, remember, with Audrey in New Blood, it was kind of, they were kind of talking a little bit, hanging out, but it never really got, deep, because it never got a chance to. Now, we're also introduced to Shauna, who will end up being a big part of the episode's B story as well. So from there, we go back to the A story at the Seneca Nation Clinic, and we find Dexter still in bed as Dr. Abrams comes in to check on him. And Harry's ghost is next to him, and Dexter tells Harry that he missed him before asking if he came to say goodbye. Dexter still thinks he's going to die, right? Harry explains that there's no, clause in the code that says give up and die. Dexter explains that he doesn't have much to live for, but Harry reminds Dexter that he has a son. Dexter explains that Harrison shot him and that he might be better off without him, that in fact the whole world might have been better off, if he hadn't been rescued from the shipping container all those years ago, and we're transported to said shipping container at that point. Now, Harry explains to Dexter that he made a lot of mistakes in his life, but that rescuing him wasn't one of them. Dexter explains that he can think of a few people that might disagree. Harry explains that those people are all murderers, but Dexter reminds him that he hurt good people too, that he wasn't there for Harrison, and that when he actually showed up to Iron Lake that he tried to mold him in his image, but that ultimately he was wrong about him, that Harrison made it pretty clear out in the woods that he's nothing like him, that he's angry, not in spite of him, but because of him. Harry then explains to Dexter that his brother didn't have a father. Dexter, retorts to Harry that Brian didn't have a mother either, thanks to him. He's still blaming Harry for his mom's death. Harry then angrily replies to Dexter's insinuation that Harry didn't have a mother because of him, but that he believes that Harrison needs him. Now, we go back to the hospital room and Dexter sits up in bed just as my man James Dokes appears at his bedside, or James Dokes' ghost, with his patented line, "Surprise, motherfucker." That shit slaps. But Dexter makes a joke about there supposedly being 3 ghosts, right? As in A Christmas Carol. Now, Dokes' ghost asks Dexter if he's not happy to see him. Dexter tries to regain control of his subconscious before Dokes explains that their conversation needs to happen. Dexter then claims to Dokes that he already knows what he's going to say, that he's a creep motherfucker, right? He explains to Dokes that he was right about him all along, but Dokes corrects Dexter, explaining that he was wrong about him, that buried underneath all the effed up Bay Harbor butcher shit is a kernel of good. I ain't buying it. Dexter explains that good isn't a word he ever heard Dokes associate with him, but Dokes tells him to hold on to that for the sake of Harrison, that he needs that part of him, that he should go to him, otherwise he is just some creep motherfucker, and this is when Dexter finally opens his eyes, right? So, his doctors come in and welcome Dexter back to the land of the living, explaining to Dexter that he's been in a coma for 10 weeks, so that's how much time has passed since he's been shot, right? Dexter asked the doc how close he was to dying, and Dr. Abrams explains that it was touch and go for a bit, but that luckily he got shot in 0-degree weather, and that the cold and snow slowed his heart rate, lessening his blood loss. He goes on to claim that if it had been summer, he would have been deader than his last marriage, but that instead he pulled through. As the doc exits the room, Dexter asks about his son, and Dr. Abrams explains that Harrison left town weeks ago and that nobody has heard from him since. I don't know why the doctor would know that, but okay. Now, this sequence served as filler in my opinion, right? It was also another data dump wherein the writers attempt to explain how Dexter survived the end of New Blood, right? They're attempting to take care of old business before starting us out on this new journey. And I guess it's necessary, again, considering how New Blood ended. But just a heads up, they're still not done closing old wounds from the previous show. So just keep that in mind. Now, back in New York City at Hotel Empire, as Harrison drags a luggage cart across the lobby, he notices Ryan taking a drunk and stumbling Shauna from the bar upstairs. Now, Harrison approaches and asks if Shauna's all right, and Ryan tells Harrison that Shauna is his wife, that she had too many margaritas, and that it happens every time they're in the city. And he asks Harrison to help him get her to the elevator. And we can see that Harrison is feeling a little off about what's taking place, but, Ryan's a good tipper, so he helps him all the same, right? Now, once they get inside the elevator, Ryan asks Harrison to hit his floor. Harrison remarks to Ryan that he didn't know he was married, and Ryan then gets this creepy look on his face before replying, "Why would you? Now go ahead, 11th floor." Harrison presses the button for the 11th floor, and the trio ride the elevator up to Ryan's floor, and then they get off the elevator. Now, as Harrison helps carry Shauna to Ryan's room, he tells Ryan that he knows Shauna isn't his wife, that she's in town for the medical conference. Ryan then laughs and replies, "You got me. We just met at the bar, and she and I are going to have some fun. She's cool with it." And at this point, Shauna drunkenly asks, "Cool with what," right? Now, this line is to emphasize that Shauna doesn't quite know what's going on here, right? It's a little on the nose, but, fine, okay. Ryan then tips Harrison $100 and tells him to be a good boy and open his door. Now, Harrison takes the money and begrudgingly opens the door to Ryan's room with his own master key card. Keep that in mind. Ryan then takes Shauna inside and closes the door behind him. Harrison stands at the door and tells himself that what's happening isn't his problem. He then walks away from the door, but just as he does, he hears Shauna say, "No, stop it." And that's when he comes back, opening the door, again with his master key card, and he enters the room to find Ryan standing over Shauna, who's now laid out on the bed, passed out. Harrison confronts Ryan, asking him to let him take Shauna back to her room, and that if he does, they can act like nothing happened. Because Harrison don't want to give up that he don't want to surrender the bag. You feel me? Ryan then pushes Harrison and calls him nothing, explaining to Harrison that Shauna won't even remember what happened. All right. Now at that point, Harrison and Ryan get into a fight in the bathroom, and after Ryan pushes Harrison into the bathtub, causing him to rip down the shower curtain on accident from the curtain rod, Ryan jumps into the bathtub on top of Harrison and quickly gets the upper hand, claiming that Harrison thinks he's some kind of hero. But eventually Harrison is able to turn the tables on Ryan, and eventually Ryan surrenders, telling Harrison that he can get the bitch out of there if he wants, that there's plenty more where she came from. And as Harrison contemplates the idea that Ryan isn't going to stop his predatory behavior, he bludgeons him to death with a nearby toilet tank cover. Right? That porcelain boy, dog. I mean, I guess you probably could beat somebody to death with one of them things if you hit him hard enough, right? Now, in the immediate aftermath of the incident, Harrison is regretful of his actions. He then remembers that Shauna still passed out on the bed. And he becomes even more anxious about what he just did, probably because, he understands there may be a witness to the crime, right? Hey, Harrison, you ain't following the code, my G. Harrison quickly undresses and cleans up, changing his clothes before carrying Shauna back to her room. And on the way, another guest brings out their room service cart out into the hallway, but doesn't see the pair. Harrison finally gets Shauna back to her room, and he lays her down on the bed, still in her clothes. Harrison then takes the room service cart in the hallway and goes down to housekeeping and grabs a new shower curtain and some cleaning supplies. He then goes into the hotel salon and spa and mixes together a solution of some kind, right? Before finally going into a staff area and grabbing yet another shower curtain and a new toilet tank cover. And from there, we see Harrison put his earbuds in again before wrapping Ryan's dead body in one of the shower curtains. He then cleans the blood off the sink and then the floor before replacing the toilet tank cover and then putting up the new shower curtain and finally stuffing Ryan's dead body into the bottom portion of the room service cart. He then takes the body down to the kitchen where he remembers disposing of Kurt Caldwell's body with his dad at the end of New Blood. Remember that. And he undresses the corpse before putting on an apron and chopping the body into 9 pieces. This is also important. And as he hacks away at the body with a large butcher knife, we see a speck of blood shoot up, sticking to one of the ceiling tiles overhead. That's going to be important too, right? Now, Harrison continues to remove body parts, shoving them into garbage bags as the hands on the nearby clock continue to move towards the morning. He then hoses down the stainless steel table, squeegees the floor, sprays the table with what I assume is bleach or the special bleach that he's mixed up, the special solution that he's mixed up that probably gets rid of blood, right? And then ties the garbage bags exactly the way he did at the start of the B story, right? And just as he finishes his cleanup, he hears the garbage truck outside and has to rush the bags out back to be picked up. And we are reminded that he missed a speck of blood on one of the ceiling tiles by the shot that the director chooses to use there. So that we understand that the speck of blood he missed will prove to be important, narratively speaking, as the story moves forward, right? And we watch Harrison stand outside as he watches the trash be picked up by the garbage man. And after they do so and drive away, he throws up. Now, as it pertains to the story we're being told from a macro perspective, this is the catalyst of the season arc, right? That being the thing that takes place that changes everything, right? And knowing that can kind of help us determine what might happen moving forward as the season progresses. So I always tell you guys that though teleplay structure is a bit different than screenplay structure, right? That what I mean by that is TV scripts are different from film scripts in their structure. When you zoom out and you take a look at the story over the course of its entirety, and by its entirety, I mean all the episode scripts stacked on top of one another, what you'll find is that the beats that you would find in a feature film script are still there. They're just spread out over multiple scripts and sometimes even multiple seasons. Now, back in our A story at the clinic, we see Dexter with Janice the nurse, learning how to walk again. And she's kind of having to help him. Now, Dexter seems frustrated, but Janice explains that, the phrase use it or lose it applies to his current situation, reminding him that it'll take time for him to get back to his old self. Now, Dexter asks how long he should expect it to take before he can walk unassisted, and she explains that considering how long he was in his coma and his age, that he should be grateful that the catheter wasn't permanent. Ouch. So she then goes on to remark that he must have been in pretty good shape before the incident. And Dexter explains that he used to chase deer through the snow before the pair come across a man laying in a nearby bed, unconscious and on life support, named Norm Blacksnake, who Dexter knows because he used to come into the gun store every once in a blue moon where Dexter worked, if you remember in New Blood, right? Now, Janice claims that Norm drove himself to the clinic in the midst of having a heart attack, that he has no friends and no family, and that he will likely die with nothing but the box of shit he came to the clinic with. And then she tells Dexter that PT time is over and she escorts him back to his room in his bed. Now, I want you to remember what she says about Norm Blacksnake, right? Because all that becomes really important, for the story kind of moving forward, because a lot of times as writers, you have to create ways for what you need to happen. And this is the writers kind of setting that up. And we'll get to that a little bit later on here. So just put a pin in that just for now. Because this, like I said, this scene might seem insignificant, but it's actually, again, the writers creating a rather layered set of circumstances wherein they prepare Dexter to go and look for Harrison, right? By showing Dexter Norm's state, what it might look like foregoes a potential life with his son, leaving him to die all alone in a hospital bed with no friends and no family. It's the thing that makes it makes Dexter long for a different outcome, one that he might yet be able to have with Harrison. So again, like I said, this is both narratively important, both from a logistical standpoint, and it's kind of placing the bricks on top of each other that are going to force Dexter to eventually go, you know what, I will go look for my son. So this is kind of helping Dexter come to the conclusion that the writers need him to come to for the rest of the season to even take place, right? So that's important. Now, upon arriving back to his room, Dexter sits and asks himself, or Harry's ghost in this case, how he's not in a prison hospital as he wonders where Angela is. Now, Harry's ghost explains that he doesn't know, that he figured Dexter would be leaving Iron Lake in a body bag or handcuffs. And just then, we see an unidentified police officer walking with purpose through the clinic. And their face isn't shown, and that's the writers wanting us to assume it's Angela. But, if you've seen the episode, you know that it's not. Turns out it's good old Teddy Reed from New Blood to explain to us where Angela is, right? Now, the writers try to make us think that Teddy might be there to arrest Dexter because there's this little tense moment where they lock eyes and, I think this kind of stuff is kind of cheesy, but I get it, right? You kind of want to build a couple of moments of tension. But he isn't there to arrest Dexter. Instead, he reaches into his pocket and he gives Dexter a manila folder from Angela and explains that she left town with Audrey after everything happened. Now, as Dexter opens the envelope, we see that it's a picture of young Angela with her friend Iris. And as he turns the photo over, the message reads, "We're even. Now get the hell out of Iron Lake." As Teddy explains further that he's now acting sheriff of Iron Lake, which I suppose makes sense because he's the only one left. Because you remember, Sergeant Logan's dead, killed by Dexter's hand. And that Angela felt bad for mistakenly arresting him for the murder of Matt Caldwell, ultimately, wrongfully, blaming the murder on his dad, and that she was even more sorry for shooting him. So she covered for Harrison in that regard, too. Then he explains to Dexter that Angela found the bullet holes from Logan discharging his weapon when Dexter killed him and told people that he did it in self-defense before finally asking Dexter if he wanted to press charges against Iron Lake Sheriff's Department for Angela shooting him. And of course, Dexter declines to do so, which seems to make Teddy really, really happy. And, this part of the A story is just more of the same, right? Exposition, plain and simple. This is, again, like I said, where the writers attempt to explain why Dexter is at, the Seneca Nation Clinic instead of a prison hospital. So again, still the writers taking care of old business, right? Now, back in our B story, we see that the trash men are at the dump, dumping the bags, right? And as they're tossing the bags around, one of the bags rips open, revealing parts of Ryan's dead body. And from there, we skip ahead and we're introduced to Claudette Wallace and Melvin Oliva, a pair of New York City homicide detectives as they enter the crime scene, right? Well, it's now a crime scene, right? And Detective Wallace talks to an Officer Oskowitz, who explains to her that the sanitation worker was separating the trash bags, that a bag ripped and two pieces of a human leg fell out. She asks if he knows where the trash came from, and after he kind of, tries to pretend like he does, it turns out he does not, right? And Detective Wallace examines the scene and determines that the rest of the body has to be there somewhere, explaining to us that forensics can't identify a victim with a toe print, that they need a head or a hand. She asks Officer Oskowitz if he has any other information relevant to the investigation, and Officer Oskowitz explains that he does not, so Detective Wallace asks that he leave the scene. I always kind of hate when writers do stuff like this, where, again, the writers are trying to tell us, oh, well, we can't identify a victim with a toe print, so now we have to look for the rest of the body. Like, I think we, the audience, are smart enough to kind of figure that much out, but I do hate when the writers kind of pretend like we're stupid, and that's kind of something that's happening in this scene right here with the small writing, but I'll just go ahead and press forward. Now, Detective Oliver tells Detective Warren that she should be nicer to Eunice. She asks him why she would encourage that kind of incompetence before putting on a set of headphones and playing music from her phone as she rummages through the trash for the rest of Ryan's body parts. Now, I don't know why she's putting on headphones to do this, because now you're kind of going like, well, Harrison wears headphones too, so that's two characters now that have the exact same kind of quirk. And I just think it's lazy. Like, we didn't really need it. Like, why does she need headphones to look through trash? But I digress. Now, the other officers stand by Detective Oliver as all this takes place, and they ask him what Detective Wallace's deal is. Detective Oliver remarks that Detective Wallace sees things that they don't, that they should watch and learn. Detective Wallace immediately notices how Harrison tied the bags that the legs were in and begins looking for bags tied similarly. I told y'all that was going to be important. Now, once she finds them, she calls out to Oliver to come over and help her. And from there, we skip forward again to see Ryan's whole naked body laid out as the detectives examine it. And Oliver remarks that the victim wasn't robbed because he's still wearing the ring he had on his finger, which is why the ring was specifically highlighted in the scene with Ryan, Harrison, and Stefan in the lobby. But Wallace notices that his watch is also missing because there are tan marks on the victim's arm in the shape of said watch. Keep in mind that Harrison is currently in possession of said watch. I told you that was going to be an important piece, right? And this scene is supposed to show us that Detective Wallace is really good at her job, not unlike Dexter at a crime scene, right? So this is like, oh, she's going to be a formidable foe. That's kind of what they're lining up here for us. We're supposed to respect what Harrison will be up against moving forward from here. That's the point. I'm not really sure why the writers had her listening to music in her headphones just like Harrison did, because I just don't like when you kind of duplicate quirks, because I feel like there's so many different ways where you can make characters different from other characters. Why you would attempt to make them the same, I don't know. But maybe we'll find something out later on down the line that will make that decision make sense. In this particular episode, I don't understand why it was done. But maybe, again, like I said, I reserve the right to change my mind as we move forward. Now, back at the clinic, we find Dexter walking on a treadmill. And this time he does so unassisted by the nurse. And now Nurse Janice does enter, and she makes him stop, explaining that he's done enough for the day, that he has time, right? Now Dexter explains that he wants to recover enough so that he can go and find his son, as Janice helps him out by helping him put his robe on, right? Telling him that it's lunchtime, asking if he can make it back to his room. But when he gets there, he's greeted by none other than my man, Angel Batista, right? Now, Angel approaches Dexter carefully and gives him a big hug, remarking that it's like seeing a ghost. He sits on the bed as Angel reveals that he brought him a Cubano, right? Now, Dexter eats as Angel explains how surprised he was to hear from Angela explaining that he was alive. He asked Dexter then why he disappeared, and Dexter explains that he was pretty wrecked after what happened to Deb. Angel, speaking of Deb, what did you do with Deb's body? We saw security footage of you wheeling her out of the hospital. Dexter explains that he put Deb on his boat and drove straight into the storm, which is true if you remember the end of the OG series, right? He then explains further that the boat capsized and that he lost Deb's body. He tells Batista that Deb combined with what happened to Rita made him realize that he couldn't stay in Miami, so he left, and he ended up in Iron Lake. Batista then asks why he faked his death and changed his name to Jim Lindsay. Dexter explains that he needed a new start, that his life had been such hell that grief does something to a person. Now, Batista agrees, explaining that he lost him too, him as in Dexter, that he even spoke at his memorial, and Dexter thanks him and tells Batista that he thought about reaching out, but that he just couldn't reopen that door. And Batista then kind of remarks that the door is open now, but that he's still confused because when Angela called him, she swore that he was the Bay Harbor butcher, right? Now, Dexter plays like he's shocked at the thought, like, what the fuck? Explaining to Batista that he and Angela had a volatile relationship. Hey, that excuse is not going to fly, bro. Come on, man. That she must have been really pissed at him to call Batista. That it's crazy. Batista remarks that it gets even crazier than that because he hopped on a plane but then found out that Angela shot him, and that when he talked to her the very next day, she had backtracked on everything, claiming that it was all a mistake. He then explains that Maria LaGuerta told him in confidence back in the day that she was certain that he was the Bay Harbor butcher. But see, it wasn't in confidence. Like, everybody knew that because Batista even pulled Maria to the side and was like, what are you doing? Like, remember, she blamed Dexter, and Quinn and Batista and Masuka and everybody was like, Maria, like, no, the shirt that you found, that was an old shirt with an evidence number. There's prints on the shirt. It's your, like, Dexter set her up, so everybody knew that she thought Dexter was the Bay Harbor butcher. She was like, I'm going to nail you to the wall. You remember that? So, that's the writers kind of getting their index cards a little mixed up, right? But, he also claims that, Maria was killed by some old cartel shithead, right? And again, this is information that Dexter has already because he was sitting in an interrogation room when they sorted all this out, right? So for Batista to talk to him like he doesn't already know this, again, is the writers having their index cards messed up. So I got to dock the writers for that because you got to watch the OG series if you're gonna make a remake. Dog, you got to get your ducks in order. And this is another reason why I don't like when they make remakes and they shift writing. Writers are different and stuff like that, and they don't do their homework properly before they just go writing shit down, right? But maybe it's a little thing to you guys, it's a big thing for me. And then, he also brings up that Dokes thought Dexter was the Bay Harbor butcher, and he goes, what did he used to call you? Remembering it, creep motherfucker, right? And Dexter remarks that Dokes always had a way with words before faking like he's tired, claiming that he needs his rest, right? So Batista kind of smiles and then gets up, putting on his hat, explaining that he'd be back tomorrow so they could catch up some more. And on the way out the door, he turns and he explains to Dexter that his death certificate was changed, that Batista changed it, right? Feeling like Dexter Morgan needed to be legally resurrected, right? There's that word again. And Dexter thinks that, and he tells Dexter that, hey, now you can vote, you can renew your license and be a regular Joe. Now, Dexter remarks that it's very thoughtful of Batista to do such a thing, and Batista tells Dexter to rest before finally exiting the room. And this is when Dexter thinks to himself that Batista did this because he can't prosecute a dead person, right? And which makes some sense. I understand that Batista, being a cop, would want Dexter to truly pay for his crimes, not take the easy way out like offing himself or ending up dead, right? Now, in the hallway, Batista approaches Dr. Abrams, thanking him for reaching out to him about Dexter. So again, why is Dr. Abrams calling the police? You see what I'm saying? I don't understand why he would call the police, but again, the writers are slipping on their pimping here. But Dr. Abrams claims that it's good for patients to have friends around, right? Because I can promise you, as Jim Lindsay, I can promise you that Dr. Abrams would have no idea who Dexter's friends are, especially friends from Miami. Now, he might have an idea of who his friends might be in Iron Lake, but not from Miami. So, again, that's the writer slipping on their pimping right there, right? And then Batista asks how long Dexter will have to stay at the clinic, and Dr. Abrams explains that he should be around for a couple of more weeks due to his injuries, right? Now, Batista asks about visiting hours, and Dr. Abrams explains that they're from 11 to 4. Batista explains then that he'll be back at 11, and he shakes the doc's hand, and he catches out, right? Now, back at Hotel Empire, or our B story, the police are now parked out front, lights flashing, right? Inside the hotel, the detectives enter as Harrison watches from the other side of the lobby. Now, he wanders upstairs. Bad idea, right? But okay. Back to the scene of the crime as Detective Wallace stands amongst the forensics team as they swab the furniture and they take pictures. And she asks one of the techs for a luminol sweep as Stefan stands by, right? Now, Harrison stands outside the yellow tape, peering inside the room as the investigation continues. And as he stares into the room, he sees the ghost of Ryan, and he's startled by it. causing him to back away and bump into the room service tray in the hallway, knocking over the dishes that were positioned on top of it, right? And the noise gets the attention of Detective Wallace, who asks Stefan, hey, what is his name? Stefan tells Detective Wallace Harrison's name as Harrison wheels the tray down the hall, and he's turned away, trying not to let Detective Wallace see his face, right? But you know how she wouldn't have seen your face if you didn't come to the 11th floor in the first place, right? You're one of the few people who actually know what's going on, Harrison. This is a rookie mistake. But okay. But I get why Harrison makes this mistake, because it's something that the writers need Harrison to do to kind of move the story forward, because you could tell that the writers are leaning towards Detective Wallace eventually coming to the conclusion that Harrison is a suspect, right? So that's what's happening there. Even though it's clumsy, that's what they're doing. So back at the clinic, in our A story, we find Dexter in bed resting. And he's jolted awake by the sound of a monitor beeping incessantly, right? And he looks down at his own machine, kind of scared, before realizing that it's Norm Blacksnake's, and that he's finally passed, all alone, just like Janice warned that he would, right? Now, Harry's ghost then appears, explaining to Dexter that he doesn't have to die alone, that he still has Harrison. Dexter explains that he knows that as he watches Dr. Abrams and Janice pronounce Norm dead, right? R.I.P., my guy. He lays back down on the pillow, and, that scene bleeds into another scene where Janice's standing over Dexter, telling him to relax as she massages his body, right? And Dexter explains that he's not used to being on the table with someone standing over him, a little Dexter humor, right? And Janice understands Dexter's stress, remarking that his friend Kurt Caldwell turned out to be a serial killer and that he got shot, stating that it's a crazy world out there, right? Now, Dexter agrees, but then Janice explains that she heard on the news that a man's chopped up body was found. Dexter then asks where, and she replies, down in New York City, right? She then goes on to explain that they found the body chopped into 9 pieces. She tells Dexter that living on the res can be shitty, but that she would take it over a big city with crazy white men running around chopping up bodies, right? So she then explains to Dexter that she meant no offense, but that serial killers always seem to be white men. And it's funny, in this episode, how many times, characters kind of refer to Dexter like he might be a killer or something like that. That's just kind of, the writers kind of being tongue in cheek. But she then, Janice then remarks that maybe they shouldn't talk bad about big cities because Kurt Caldwell was a killer and he was right there in Iron Lake taking their girls, right? And it's here that Dexter remembers teaching Harrison to cut bodies into 9 pieces when he helped him kill Kurt, wondering if New York might be where Harrison went. Dexter tells Janice that he's kind of beat and that he wants to end their session for the day. And remember, like I said, Harrison remembering cutting Kurt Caldwell's body into 9 pieces when he was trying to figure out what to do with Ryan's body and how that would come back around. This is that coming back around, right? So those two instances are tied together, and this is how Dexter kind of figures out where he can at least start to look for Harrison, right? So next, we find Dexter back in his room, reading about Ryan Foster's death on his phone, noticing that Ryan was a repeat sexual predator that slipped through the cracks. Harry's ghost appears, explaining to Dexter that he fits the code, that Harrison may be following in his footsteps after all, that the city's only 4 hours away, that it would be an easy drive for Harrison to make from Iron Lake. Dexter remarks that it would be perfect place for Harrison to disappear. Harry's ghost then remarks that if Harrison is there and he did kill Ryan, that he could be in real trouble, that the NYPD is no joke, right? Dexter remarks that if they've already found the body, that there's no telling what other mistakes Harrison may have made. He begins then packing his things when Harry's ghost mentions that Batista's going to be there soon. Dexter remembers that Harrison took his truck, so he'll need a car. So he goes into Norm's room and rummages through his box of belongings and finds the keys. And as he does, he notices that Batista's already there, asking Janice at the front desk if he can see Dexter even though he's early. She explains that he can't see Dexter yet, because visiting hours aren't until 11, right? But that he can wait for him in the waiting area until visiting hours start. Now, Dexter hides from Batista and takes out his phone, calling the clinic, claiming to be Sergeant Quinn, calling for Batista, right? This was another part where the writers just they lost me on this one. Janice gives Batista the phone, allowing Dexter to kind of sneak back into his room unseen, where he goes into the bathroom and turns on the shower. Batista grabs the phone and, noticing that no one's on the line, is a bit perplexed, right? Dexter then goes out of the bathroom window, out into the parking lot, finds Norm's truck eventually, and then drives away. And he then stops off at a clothing store and he goes inside because, he's wearing a hospital robe, a Seneca Nation t-shirt, and pajama pants and slippers, right? So back at the clinic, Batista asks again to see Dexter, and Janice gets up to go and checks Dexter's room. She comes back explaining that he's still in the shower, and Batista remarks that it's been 45 minutes, and so he goes in to check on Dexter himself. He enters the room and then the bathroom, calling out to Dexter, asking if he's okay. And eventually he pulls back the shower curtain to find that Dexter indeed has escaped. Right? And Dexter then exits the clothing store with a new outfit from head to toe, gets back in Norm's truck, and then continues on towards the city, right? And next we're introduced to Charlie, played by the great Uma Thurman of Kill Bill fame, right? And she exits her vehicle outside of an apartment building as we see a shady character wearing a bubble jacket, sunglasses, and a hat exiting the building, right? Keep that in mind. Now, she carries with her a small duffel bag as she enters the building, and once inside, she enters one of the apartment and she puts on a mask, obscuring her face as she uses her phone to try to find cameras inside. Now, after checking for cameras and finding none, she takes off the mask and she begins searching around the apartment for something, right? Now, she looks through the refrigerator and the freezer, finding vegan ice cream, so I guess that little tidbit will become important later on, but okay. And she finally goes into the living room where she finds the indentation of milk crates in the carpet. She looks around the room and she finds actual milk crates in the corner, and she places them over the indentations on the carpet. She then stands on top of the milk crates and she pops open the ceiling tile right above it, pulling down a portfolio full of driver's licenses with red X's, looks like in blood, over the pictures, saying out loud to herself, "Effing psycho," right? She then goes into her bag and pulls out a box full of money with a silver envelope on top. She takes the box, standing back on the milk crates, and she places the envelope inside the portfolio with the driver's license in it, placing it back where she found it. And then as she exits the building, she makes a phone call and she explains that the invitation has been delivered, simply put, right? Now, this is the episode's runner, and by that I mean the part of the story that will continue likely through the remainder of the season, right? In contrast, both the A and B stories will typically come to an end, or at least what I like to call a soft ending, meaning that if not a complete ending, at the very least, a very good stopping place, right? Now, the B story in this episode ends with Harrison watching Detective Wallace process his crime scene, right? Ending at a good stopping place, right? And by that I mean no arrest for Harrison tonight. In fact, he's not even a suspect at this particular point, though I expect that to change over the course of the season. And in fact, it looks like Harrison may be taking Dexter's place here in the show as the one who's constantly under suspicion but never being able to be caught by law enforcement, right? So we'll see how that works out. Now, as for the A story, it finally ends with seeing Dexter finally make it to New York City, right? Now, he drives across the bridge into Manhattan and then through the busy streets, and he almost hits a pedestrian walking across the street while on his phone. And the pedestrian calls Dexter an asshole for trying to run him over, right? Now, Dexter seems a bit frustrated by the event, and Harry's ghost appears in the passenger seat explaining to Dexter that the man doesn't fit the code. And Dexter replies simply, "No shit, Dad," and continues on, finally arriving at Hotel Empire, where he sees Harrison out front helping a guest. And Dexter thinks to himself, "My son, I could cry. Actually, I can't cry. Damn it." Cut to black. Now, I gotta tell you guys, I'm a long time Dexter stan, right? But I thought this episode was just okay, right? I didn't love how much time was spent watching Dexter talk to ghosts, right? Especially since some of the conversations were not of the nature that the person he was talking to would even be involved in having with him, right? The back and forth between Dexter and Dokes was just weird as fuck, considering their relationship in the OG show, right? I mean, I don't see Dokes at all telling Dexter that he's a good person, not even a little bit. And I don't know, and I know you guys are going to be like, well, this was Dexter essentially talking to himself through ghosts from his past, but I contend that at the very least, the rest of the conversations at least felt like things that the dead people might actually say to him, whether he was saying them to himself in his subconscious or not. Plus, it was literally like half the episode, and I just don't think we needed quite that much exposition, but maybe that's me, right? I thought the writers could have maybe spread this shit out over the course of the season, right? We didn't need all the data dumped at once, right? I just think that was actually a really, really poor writing decision on behalf of the writers. I also didn't like how Dexter's reunion went with Batista, right? Batista just seemed way too happy to see him instead of overly suspicious, right? And though I definitely think that will change as the season wears on, right? That Batista's appearance in this episode made him look like the same old lunkhead he was back in the OG series, right? Not knowing what the hell was going on. I mean, remember, guys, he literally let Dexter walk out of the precinct in Miami Metro after murdering Oliver Saxon live and in living color on his last day of work, with not even so much as a stern talking to, right? He was like, why'd you kill him, Dexter? Why were you even taking, his, the blood, Dexter? And Dexter like, I just wanted to make sure it was processed correctly. Oh, all right. I'm like, nah, bro, you don't even work for Miami Metro no more, bro. Why are you here doing folks, dog? Why are you stabbing people with pens, bro? Come on, man. It's just too much, right? Then he hears after all these years that Dexter isn't dead and that he might be the Bay Harbor Butcher. And now add to that Dokes thought he was the Butcher, but was killed, though Dokes was framed as the Butcher himself. But then Maria thought Dexter was the Butcher as well, and then she died suddenly. Now Angela, someone who's completely unaffiliated with Miami Metro, also thought the same thing. Like, Batista, my guy, you're a detective, my dude. What, dog? I hope nothing ever happens to me or a family member where somebody like Batista got to solve the crime, bro. Because this nigga is not quick on the draw at all, my guy. I just, how many pieces have to be in place before someone who's supposed to be a seasoned police detective goes, you know what? I think I got it. You feel what I'm saying? Now, and speaking of Angela, the way the writers explained the Angela of it all was just completely ridiculous, right? I mean, after all that, the writers basically crapped all over Angela's character development from the last show. Not only did Angela let Harrison go after shooting Dexter in the woods, which did not at all feel like the kind of thing she would do, because the writers posited her as the kind of person that would break up with and arrest her boyfriend on suspicion of being a serial killer. So why would you let an actual killer go? Somebody that you watched, do the killing. But then all of a sudden she decides that even though she knows Dexter is a serial killer, she decides that because he helped her catch Kurt Caldwell for all the murders that he committed and the murder of her friend Iris, right? That all is forgiven. I mean, he killed both Caldwells and Sergeant Logan on her watch. How in the hell she lets Dexter get away with the murder of her deputy, her sergeant in her department is just wild to me. Like, it's like, nah, bro, like, you need more people. Like, I'm not even buying that. And I just hate the fact that the writers are up to their same old tricks here, wherein the only reason Dexter doesn't get caught for his nonsense is because people in the moment lose their nerve, or they lose all sense of right and wrong, and they just completely become stupid, or they die at the last second. And I can deal with the people who die at the last seconds, right? I mean, Dokes got killed before he could turn Dexter in. I can forgive that one, right? Because, I mean, it's Dokes versus Dexter. Someone's going to win. You get that, right? Same for Maria, right? Maria figured out what was going on, and it came to a head, and Deb had to make a choice, and she ultimately chose Dexter over Maria. I can live with that one, too. Now, but Quinn was dirty, so he let Dexter go, even though he knew he was a killer. Right now, I mean, you add to that, it was kind of complicated because he was in love with Deb. And so I think in order for him not to hurt Deb, he kind of had to let a serial killer go. Quinn absolutely knew that Dexter was on some nonsense. He absolutely knew. But, that one was kind of, messy. Now, Lundy seemed to have no idea. You know what I'm saying? Deb, of course, eventually found out on accident, but Dexter was her brother, so I get that one, right? But Batista here is just lost in the sauce from the beginning of the show all the way to the end, and that's why his reunion with Dexter this episode was so disappointing, because Batista is supposed to be mad for all the people who died trying to prove that Dexter was the Bay Harbor Butcher. For this Bay Harbor Butcher shit to now be back in rotation, Batista has got to be livid. He was married to Maria, for God's sake. Like, I mean, bro, like... And my thing is, even if you want to sell me that Batista's trying to investigate and he's trying to good cop Dexter, I'm like, bro, Batista should have at least sharply questioned Dexter. I think he should have at least bad cop Dexter, right? Because I'm not going to be, this reunion was supposed to be fireworks, bro. Batista was supposed to go to Dexter's ass, dog. Gunshot wound or nah, dog. He was supposed to grab that dude by the top of his robe and pin that dude to the bed and be like, dog, I'd have cracked your shit for disrespecting our department like this, dog, for playing games with us, bro. But we don't get that. We've been waiting a couple of years to get that. Ever since I found out this show was coming back, I'm like, oh, we got to see what Batista gonna say when he get face to face with Dexter. And it was just It just wasn't what I thought it was gonna be, dog. He played good cop with him as though he just expected Dexter to simply confess to being all butchery in Miami while side gigging as a blood spatter analyst for Miami Metro for years, right? Not even for months, for years. I also thought that Harrison's story. I thought Harrison's, story, his half of the episode was actually okay. Even though I thought that there was a lot that was clumsily written, I thought the murder that was committed was clumsily written as well. Watching Harrison, though, find his own way into following his father's footsteps was rather interesting. And I'll admit that wasn't exactly. I wasn't exactly sure how Harrison would be impacted by having shot his dad at the end of the previous series, but what the writers chose to go with here was a pleasant surprise. I'll give them points for that, right? But let's be real. He literally helped Ryan take Shauna up to the 11th floor for a good old date R word, right? And as if it wasn't, Ryan wasn't confessing to premeditated R word in front of a witness who happened to work at the hotel that said R word was scheduled to take place in, right? I mean, he literally scheduled it like it was a sporting event, bro. And Harrison was just like, oh, all right. And I just thought that was jumping the shark in a way, to me, that was completely unnecessary, right? Now, other than that, I thought the rest of the episode was fairly clean, right? I thought most of the small writing was okay. I mean, I thought every once in a while the writers were trying to kind of being a little too cute, but and the episode kind of moved pretty quickly from beginning to end. But I think that was largely due to the fact that not a whole lot took place, right? If you really, really think about it, basically, the whole episode took place either inside the hotel or inside the clinic where Dexter was. And they just kind of flip-flopped back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until the episode had kind of come to a conclusion. So there's that. Now, overall, I would give this episode a 60%. Or 6.0 if you're thinking IMDb score. Now, as for the things I would have changed, right? First things first, I would have maybe had the episode start in the same place, but maybe kept the flashbacks and the talking to the ghosts to people who were truly close to Dexter, like Harry and Deb, right? Now, I understand that maybe they couldn't get Jennifer Carpenter to come back. I get it. But if I had written this episode assuming that the world was my oyster, that's what I would have done, right? That would have cut the exposition in half and moved the episode along, even if it meant an episode runtime that would be 3 or 4 minutes shorter, right? I also wouldn't have undone everything that made Angela herself in New Blood. In fact, I would have had Angela in New Blood. I would have had her show up at the clinic and had her maybe, at the very least, explain, hey, here's what the new plan is. Here's what I decided to do while you was passed out, But what I think I really would have done is I would have made Dexter have to escape from the Seneca Nation Clinic in Iron Lake for real, and go on the run with the full force of the Iron Lake Sheriff's Department and Batista hot on that ass, right? I think that would have definitely given the episode more pop than we got, right? And it would have set up an exciting season as Dexter tried to track Harrison down in New York City and tried to help him beat a murder rap while also trying to escape his own, right? I thought that would have been, man, we got 2 serial killers on the loose. But clearly that's not where the writers are going here. I also would have had, like I said, Batista at least press Dexter in a meaningful way about his shenanigans, maybe even let him know that he knows all about his bullshit and that he's coming for that ass, bro. Even if he just like, hey, Dexter, I just want to let you know, bro, I'm coming for that ass, dog, and I'm trying to get you the electric chair, dog. I'm trying to put you in that hot seat, player. For real, dog. We not cool no more. Don't even holler at me like that, bro. We not cool no more. But instead, he's hugging on Dexter with all this nonsense or whatever. And I get it. He's retired, so he might kind of be in Lundy mode, and he might not wield the kind of authority and power that he would have if he was still captain of Miami Metro. But again, dog, I just needed more, bro. I just did not get what I needed from that. And I also would have maybe had Harrison walk in the halls on the 11th floor and see Ryan walking a drunk Shauna into the room, and then maybe have him burst in with his universal key card, right, concern, and stopping the assault at that point. I just don't see Harrison helping him take a drunk girl to the room and then at the last second decide, oh, wait, something looks like it might be wrong here. Now let me stop it, right? And I think that Ryan's character was a little bit of a cartoon character here, right? Because nobody who's about to commit a crime talks this way, bro. I'm like, my thing is, I could understand Ryan being a little coy, but him literally saying to Harrison, like, yeah, I'm about to get it in, bro. She ain't even gonna remember this, dog. I'm telling you, dog. This how we do it. Like, come on, man. Come on. I thought the writers could do better than that, right? I want to smack them on the hand for that. I would have kind of just rewritten that so that it would kind of come off a little more believable, right? that's just not something that a person would say and do, in my opinion. So there's that. Now, as for season theories, first off, I want to say that I think the man we saw leaving the apartment building in the episode's runner is the dark passenger, right? He's dressed just like him, and his trophies were literal driver's license. So, I mean, in this particular case, that's easy work, right? Now, I also think that he might be Dexter's first and maybe his only victim this season, as I believe that Dexter is going to be more worried about helping Harrison than running up his body count, right? Another theory is it looks like Peter Dinklage's Leon Prater is running some kind of serial killer fraternity, right? Wherein he helps them maybe stay out of jail and maybe even finances them in some cases, right? And I think the invitation that Charlie dropped off was for the dark passenger to pledge, right? This may put Dexter at odds with him being Leon Prater if Dexter kills the dark passenger, which I think is all but certain, right? So it'll be interesting to see exactly how that goes, right? I also think that Harrison might be let off the hook for this murder, right? I think the cops might get close, specifically Detective Wallace, but maybe she won't have the support of the whole police department. And ultimately, they won't be able to prove that Harrison committed this murder, likely due to Dexter going around behind him and cleaning up his mess, right? And I think we might get pretty deep into the season before Harrison even knows that Dexter is alive and in New York, which I didn't originally have on my bingo card, right? I actually thought that the pair would reunite pretty quickly, but it looks like the writers are going a different way here, so it'll be interesting to see, how long exactly it is before the two kind of pair up, right? And last but not least, I think Harrison is going to fall in love with Elsa if he isn't there already, right? And it also looks like she might like him too, given the line that she made about him being pushable, and that's one of the things that she likes about him, right? So she kind of likes that she can kind of control him in some ways, get him to do stuff that she thinks that he should do. And what will be interesting is seeing how long it will be before she starts to see the red flags in him and maybe decides to distance herself, right? Because if you notice that Audrey never did see the red flags in Harrison. Well, she did see some red flags in Harrison, but it wasn't enough for her to stop fucking with him like that because, women, right? I wonder if she's a season-long love interest like Audrey was in New Blood, or if she's more in-game and she'll be around for a while, right? And she's got the kid and stuff like that. So it'll kind of be interesting to see how that thread kind of unravels as we move forward throughout the story, right? Now, my final thoughts are, look, man, you guys know me. I thought this was a mistake to bring this character back again, narratively speaking, right? And I understand from a business standpoint that as long as Michael C. Hall is willing to do it, that Dexter will be one of Paramount's more popular titles. And so from a business standpoint, I guess I get it, right? And as we prepare for what sounds like will be another fairly long story arc, because I think this show is going to go on for at least 3 or 4 seasons. My only hope is that the writers at least have the wherewithal to finally give us the ending we've been waiting 20 years for. But what do you guys think? Have you seen the first episode of Dexter Resurrection yet? If you have, what did you think about the show's episode arc and how much time we spent, with Dexter talking to ghosts at the beginning? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also support the channel now by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, be sure to go and check out themaskscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write, and I'll catch y'all on the next video.